Hi, everyone. I'm Katherine Sanders from Sanders Consulting, and this is one of the episodes of my conversations about the Surgeon General's framework for workplace mental health and well-being. And today I am delighted to be joined by Caitlin Troyer. I'm going to ask Caitlin to introduce themselves and a little bit about your expertise and your interest in workplace well-being.
Hi, everyone. Like Catherine said, my name is Caitlin. I use they, them pronouns, and I currently work as the People and Culture Coordinator at the Poverello Center, which is a shelter for folks who are unhoused. I don't have very much background in workplace well-being. I'm very new to this field, but I graduated college and entered the workforce in 2020. And so that, as all of you probably know, was a year that was not a very good time to be working. The whole world was, understaffed and overworked. And I think that has really informed my view on workplace well-being, entering at a time when it was so difficult for employees. And then, of course, that's also, I now work in social services, which has experienced a lot of the residual effects of the pandemic on the folks that we serve. And so I think that has very much made me want to focus on, what makes working in this field sustainable. And I have only been in the workforce for several years, and I have already felt like there has been several times when I have been very close to burnout. And I think that recognizing that with myself and recognizing that, I want to be able to be working for another 40 or more years, and I want that to be sustainable for myself and for others. So I think my passion for workplace well-being comes from this, view of wanting to make sure that people are taking care of themselves, but that workplaces are set up in a way that people can, and that support is provided so that we're able to do the work that we need to do. And that is a reality for everyone, that everyone feels the support necessary to avoid that burnout and to enjoy coming to work on a daily basis. So yeah, that's kind of my background there.
Caitlin, can you tell me a little bit about your experience when you felt like you were, burning out? I mean, for someone of your age and having just entered the workforce, I realize it's in, extenuating circumstances during the pandemic, but what were the indicators to you that something was going wrong or wasn't sustainable?
For me, so I was working at a food pantry and furniture bank, and we had very high needs. So it was a very go, go, go type of work environment. But there was not a lot of staff members. So an organization that did a lot, but did most of it with volunteer support, didn't have a lot of staff members able to carry that weight. So every staff member, I think, was feeling like extra amount of stress to make sure that things were happening, etc. But the signs within myself, the biggest things were that I felt like I wasn't excited to go to work anymore, and it was a job I was very passionate about. I really cared about the work we were doing, and I had built incredible relationships with the people we served. And yet I started dreading going to work. I felt more and more apathetic. I felt like I was losing a lot of my empathy for the folks that we served and the work that we were doing. Noticed myself becoming like a little bit more short, being a little bit more cranky about things that before I would have had, a wealth of patience for. So I think those were the biggest signs for me. And also, even when I felt like I never felt like I could take a break without feeling guilty. And so I think that also played heavily into it of, if I was sick or if I needed a small vacation, I felt guilty about not being there. And so I feel like even when I was stepping away from the work, I was still carrying the work with me, which obviously is not very healthy.
Yeah. And eventually then you left that position, I take it, because now you're in a different place. Yes.
Yes, and I was actually in that position through a year of service program, and so it had a start and end date. But by the time the end date came around, I was more than ready to go.
Oh my, okay.
Yeah.
So you had even like a horizon where you knew it would be over, right? Yeah, I think of that. There are some jobs, sometimes we have them if you work while you're going through school, and if the job is hard or it's boring or it's whatever, and you think, oh, it's just a summer or it's just a year, right? I can get through it. But then if you think someone might work in that job for a career, or for, 5 to 10 years, right? The difference, even psychologically, about what the day-to-day reality is, it's a big deal. Were there other people that worked at that place that had been there for a number of years, or was it mostly people who were rotating through?
There were some that had worked there for a number of years, and then there was some where there was higher turnover, but really there was less than 10 total actual staff members, and it was mostly volunteer run. And so a lot of the other staff members were also like a little bit more removed from the day-to-day, because volunteers were often the folks who were doing that. And it was, our volunteers would commit to 1 or 2 shifts a week. So it's not like they were putting in, 40 hours of volunteer time or anything like that.
I think that description, at least in, to me, you're the expert more than I am in nonprofits and how they work, but that description of the low number of staff and the high level of volunteers, I think can describe a lot of nonprofits and how they operate, which I think is challenging in and of itself. So congratulations for surviving it and for your new position, which sounds quite different. And I'm looking forward to talking with you about that. But first, if it's all right, I'm going to bring up the Surgeon General's framework and just ask you the question I've been asking everybody here, which is, okay, why is it hard to bring something up right now? That's right. I'm going to ask you, what is it that stands out for you about the Surgeon General's framework?
Yeah, I think for me, or actually, I'll wait until you have it up on the screen so that folks have a visual
So
alongside.
for some reason, that is strangely challenging for me today, but here we go. There we go. So
Perfect. Yeah, so for me, I think the biggest part of it that sticks out to me is the very center, which is worker voice and equity. I don't think you can really build a workplace well-being program without focusing on what the staff and employees need and want. And so I think centering it on what the actual needs are, and then into that as well of like not projecting what you think the needs might be. I think it's very easy in well-being to look at other models or look at other organizations and say, oh, this is, something that they did that worked really well for their staff. But it doesn't always translate exactly to it. That might not be what your staff needs at your organization. And so I think the most important thing is to ask the people you are working with every day, what is something that would make you feel more supported at work? What does workplace well-being look like to you? What do you feel like are the pieces that are missing? Because I think if you come in and you say, hey, here's this workplace well-being program that, I developed or found from someone else that I didn't ask you about at all, folks might be like, okay, well, this isn't what I wanted actually. And then I think that can cause more resentment, if they're like, what I wanted was something equally easy or equally, doable. And instead you went a different route because of not being consulted. And then I think also that centering it on the voice also ties into mattering at work. Folks feel like they are a part of, like they're able to advocate for themselves, but also like they can be a part of the positive change and that their voice matters and is significant. And I think that's just super important. So yeah, that's the part of it that sticks out the most to me.
do you mind if I go back to, your former workplace and say, so it's the way you described it, it sounded like you knew there was terrific meaning in their mission. And, obviously that it mattered that you showed up because you felt guilty if you didn't, if you took vacation or said no to something, right? So in that instance, if we were thinking about that situation, what would have helped if they would have asked and if they could have responded, what would have helped?
I think one of the biggest aspects to like the stress and the guilt that I felt was that when I did bring concerns up or, when I was expressing that I wasn't doing well or that this was a lot to handle, the responses that I received just like weren't helpful and weren't like solutions based. So like, for example, another this organization provided a lot of different resources. And one of them that I was kind of the main person who did was providing assistance for folks who needed help paying their water bills. And I was essentially the only person there who was doing that. And we had very high demand, especially, you know, at the tail end of those pandemic. There was a time when, because of the pandemic, things weren't being shut off, you know, and then all of those things ended. And I was kind of the one handling all of that. And when I expressed that it felt like too much work for one person, I was constantly staying late to make it happen, I was just kind of told, well, you know, if you don't do it, who will, and who's going to get their water back on? And
Oh,
that, I think,
wow.
just put this like added pressure on. And so I think, from my perspective, I felt like I was advocating for myself and not receiving what I was asking for. When really what could have happened is we could have trained someone else to also help with this, even if it was a volunteer who just, you know, helped out part-time every week with the intake of these applications. So I think, yeah, I think feeling like I was expressing things but wasn't getting any support back was huge. And then also, yeah, I think we did have a wonderful volunteer base. And I think that we did have volunteers who would have loved to help more, and would have liked to step up in other roles that are maybe not as often seen as traditional volunteer roles. Most of them just helped, you know, stock the food pantry, helped folks go through, you know, the pantry line. Like I said, this was still kind of COVID, so most of our pantry stuff had to be set up outside, and then, you know, we couldn't have folks touching all the food, and so we had volunteers facilitate with that. But I think we would have lots of folks who would have been interested in helping with other aspects, or seeing if we could even hire additional staff members to kind of take off some of that workload.
Yeah. Yeah, your story really resonates with me because you know, you and I know each other a little bit, and I do or have done a lot of work with people in healthcare who
Mhm.
also, this mattering at work is huge for them. They know what they do matters. It has an immediate impact on someone, right? But amping this up while perhaps the rest of these are not attended to isn't wellness, right? So meaning by itself isn't wellness. So thank you for explaining what you see in it and why. And then I know you've been doing some work in your current organization about employee wellness. So I'm wondering, could you explain a little bit or give us some examples of the sorts of things you've been focused on and how that's been going?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that we kind of started out doing, I've only been in this role since the end of October, so it's still pretty new. And so we're still kind of working on the groundwork. And the role that I'm in is brand new to the organization. So I'm kind of getting to create that and see what that looks like here. But we kind of started off with doing a survey for our staff on safety and well-being, and asking questions about, you know, what would make you feel safer at work, or, you know, what does safety look like to you? What does being safe mean to you? Because that's also, it's not just a physical thing, it's psychological. There's so many aspects to it. So then taking feedback from that and looking at what we can do to just make folks feel better physically, mentally, when they are entering the space that is work. So that's kind of been the starting point. And then I also have been just completed a course online on, you know, DEI for HR. And then it included a lot about inclusivity and like well-being and those types of initiatives. And so right now doing a lot of learning to then be able to use that in return to make things a little bit better. But I think providing more like trainings and things as well has been huge for our staff, especially. One thing that we're hoping to do within the next couple of weeks is provide, you know, an active shooter training for folks, because, you know, as you know, shootings can happen anytime, anywhere, in any type of location. And I think it's so scary to think about, you know, what if this happened here, but having someone on site who can say, okay, this is how your building's set up, and this is what you should do if anything ever happens. Obviously, I want this to be completely just a thing that puts people's minds at ease, and not something, you know, where we ever actually have to worry about this. But even something like that is something that makes staff feel more like, okay, at least if a crisis happens, if this happens, I feel like I might be equipped to handle something like that, which I think takes a lot of stress off of folks. yeah, so I think that's been a huge part of it. And then my favorite part has been that I get to know our staff better, and I get to learn from them about what they need and what their wants and desires are. So we've kind of reframed a little bit how our like check-in process works for like supervisors with the folks that they supervise, making sure that there's space for people to talk about, how they're doing, and making sure that we're kind of crafting those questions in an open-ended way that's not just like, you know, is work going well, yes or no? Like, why is it not? What are the things you're struggling with? What are your stressors here? And I think that's been huge in terms of creating better relationships between supervisors and supervisees, but then also just making folks feel like, okay, they're being heard. And then letting supervisors know that if there's ever anything that comes up that I should be aware of in those, that they can share with me, then I know, okay, this is something that is an issue for our staff that needs to be worked on. It's huge as well. But yeah, that relational part of it, which I see a lot in the Surgeon General's framework, so many aspects of it, I think, matter. The relationships that folks have at work affect that. And so building relationships where folks feel like they can come and talk to you if there is something, but then also making sure that they feel seen and heard at work. They're not just another person here every day. Like, their staff who know their name, who know things about them, who are building those relationships with them.
I have so many questions, Caitlin. I'm going to start with, so you mentioned that your role is new. Is it part of HR, and what is the role's title?
So it's the people and culture coordinator. And yeah, it is an HR position. It's kind of designed, we needed another like partial HR just because we've grown a lot as an organization. So a lot of my work is helping, with the type of stuff that maybe an HR assistant would do. And then the rest of it is also focusing on DEI and, workplace well-being, and what will make this a better culture for our folks to work in, and what makes, creates more support for our staff.
Fantastic. And how many people, approximately, how many full-time employees do you guys have?
We have about 75 total employees, but I'd say about probably 15 to 20 of those are part-time.
Okay. And if I remember correctly, you guys operate 24/7. Is that right?
Yes, we do. 24/7, 365. With the exception of, an hour here or there where we close the building for cleaning. We are open all the time.
Yeah. And I think you also have like security guards who patrol the area, or do you guys do that yourself, or how, so you mentioned physical safety. So could you talk a little bit about what some of those challenges are, in addition to the active shooter training that you're going to be taking on? What are the other like safety risk factors as far as you understand them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we work with a security company. So they're contracted to just kind of operate here. And so if we ever, feel like we need extra support from someone, who could be maybe a little bit more intimidating, there's someone we can call for support. So we do work in the work that we do. Every now and then we work with folks who are violent. And so I think that's a huge part of that physical safety aspect. Our staff are trained on verbal de-escalation, and we encourage folks to never try and go handle like situations on their own, always to take another staff member with them, those types of things. And for the most part, it's someone gets escalated. This is a shelter environment. We've got over 100 folks in the building most nights, and so it's not easy to be sleeping in the same room as 50 other people, or to be sharing that space with all these other people. And obviously folks who are unhoused have lots of different triggers, have lots of different mental health issues that they're dealing with. And so every now and then someone gets escalated and has to be removed from the building, and most of the time it's just calmly asking them like, hey, can you step outside? Are you comfortable? Can you go for a walk for an hour and then come back once you've kind of cooled off a little bit and stepped away from this space? But sometimes it escalates more and we need security or something like that. And so I think that like staff physical safety aspect comes into play then. And it's pretty rare that I think it becomes like I think our staff is good at understanding, when it's a true threat or when it's what someone is just like spewing in crisis. And I think an important thing to recognize in the work we do is, that the things that folks do and say in crisis are typically not usually about us, but are about the greater situation at hand and the situation that they are in. But yeah, we still want staff to feel like they are safe coming to work. And so we also require that anyone who has any weapons turn those into us when they come into shelter. They can ask for them back when they leave. However, we will never ever hold someone's firearms for them. So if anyone has a firearm, they're not allowed to enter our shelter space or be on the premises. And so that's another just like safety aspect of knowing that those things hopefully aren't accessible, but we don't have metal detectors. We don't expect people to show us all of their belongings when they come in. And so we have no way of really knowing if someone, is sneaking something in or anything like that. So I think it's very complicated because we're trying to create a space where our guests feel safe, where our staff feel safe without replicating a prison-like environment. We want this to feel like a safe space, but also not one that is intimidating or scary for folks to enter. And we don't want to be essentially, policing folks who are accessing our services. So that balance has been something that's very interesting to try and strike, and it's still something we're working on. But yeah, I think having an active shooter training and then any other types of things we can do to support staff in feeling more safe. And yeah, I think the biggest piece of that is getting staff feedback. And so, yeah, having those conversations, figuring out what it is that they might need.
Are there children also that come and stay in the facility, or is it all adults?
It's all adults for our overnight stays, but we do allow those under 18 to come in to access our day services, which include things like, showers, laundry, meals, those types of things.
So you mentioned a little while ago about supervisors having like a more open check-in with employees. Can you tell me more about like when does that happen? How often does it happen? I'm intrigued, and it sounds like a fantastic intervention. Is it new?
Yes and no. I think it's been happening, but we kind of just worked on rewording some of the questions maybe to try and get more intentional responses. It kind of depends on the supervisor and on the position, et cetera. A lot of our program staff, folks who are working, in administration or who have more of our just like typical desk jobs, as I might call them, typically have a supervision meeting with their supervisor on a weekly basis. And those are typically like longer extended check-ins, where there's a good amount of time set aside for questions that have come up from the supervisee or feedback that the supervisor wants to give. And I think they're incredibly helpful. I always look forward to mine every week with my supervisor because there's always so many things that come up in just a week's time. But then for our frontline staff, it looks a little bit different because they make up the bulk of our staff, but then we have less supervisors, if that makes sense. On our program side, most folks aren't supervising more than 3 or 4 people, and their job is at a desk, right? They can sit there, they can schedule meetings, they can do those types of things. Versus our supervisors for our frontline folks are also out there doing that work alongside them, right? So they're the person that they go to when something escalates and they need a supervisor or, those types of things. And they can't really block out time to meet with 10 different people for an hour each week to talk about what's going on with them. So for those roles, we have monthly check-ins. And it's kind of done as the supervisor finds time and space for that, because you never know when there's going to be a super busy time at the desk or when there might be a lull or those types of things. So they kind of fill them in as they get the opportunity to. And we have each supervisor, assigned to a number of folks who they overlap the most with, whichever supervisor they do most of their work with. And we've already seen a difference since we've kind of changed those questions a little bit. And before, I think before it was about only 2 questions and folks were kind of just like, yep, I'm fine. It wasn't getting too much meat of it or too much, detail. And so now we've kind of added a question that's like, okay, how can myself or other supervisors support you better? and asking a little bit more open-ended questions about their well-being and like what they would like to see and whatnot. So it's not just, someone offhandedly being like, oh yeah, it's good, I'm good, everything's fine. We kind of get into it a little bit more. And I've already had, actually, we had someone just recently who they had that conversation. They're like one of their first check-ins with their supervisor. They're a newer staff member. And prior to that check-in, that staff member had already told me that they were struggling a little bit with integrating with the team. They're newer to the organization. They're trying to integrate well with their coworkers, work alongside them, et cetera. And then immediately after their check-in, they were like, I feel so much better. I feel like, this person has my back. We had such a good conversation. And then the supervisor also came to me and was like, I just had this wonderful check-in with this person. Like, it went really well. I'm already seeing a change in how they're interacting with their coworkers and how they're doing at work. Like, they seem happier already. And so, yeah, we've already kind of seen positive effects of having those check-ins be a little bit more targeted, I guess might be a good word for it.
Well, and earlier you called them more open-ended, right? So, or asking someone if you're okay, if things are going well, why are they going well, right? So I don't know, because I haven't done this sort of work, but I would imagine it's not uncommon for staff to get triggered by things that they witness, or actually involved in taking care of your clients. When that happens, so it sounds like you have a few different ways you can tell if something happens, that there's a supervisor who's on that shift. Like, each shift has supervisors present. Is that correct?
Yes.
So
And
they
that's
might have
actually,
seen it, right? Okay.
that's actually also a newer-ish change for us too, since a couple months before I took this role, but we've added 2 new supervisor roles to make sure we always have a supervisor on shift. Whereas before, there was a couple hour gaps in between shifts where supervisors weren't present. We now have 2 supervisors for each shift time, and then they overlap 1 day a week. So there's always going to be a supervisor available, which I think has been very positive.
Yeah. And the people that work second or third shift, do they probably choose those shifts to begin with, because those are the openings that are offered, right? But do you find that people want to move to the day shift often, or do you have people that want to stay on the shift that they started on?
We definitely have a mix of both. I think day shift is definitely in the most popular, and lots of folks want to transfer to it. I think for the most part, it's because of, personal life reasons, whether it be that they have kids or they have other scheduled things that's just an easier shift time for them. But actually, like, quite a few folks on our night shift are very happy to be working our night shift and very much enjoy it. And I'd say same for our, swing shift. So yeah, it's definitely a mix.
And I'm drawing upon a conversation I had with you a while back, but my impression is that you actually, because of your new role and your new status in the organization, you stayed to some of the later shifts and to just spend time with people. Is that correct?
Yeah, I kind of changed my work hours initially when I started so that I would overlap a little bit more with our shift times are 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and then 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I overlap a little bit more with a 3 to 11 shift now. So I get to see those folks more and not just primarily day shift folks. And then I try to, about every other week or so, come in on an overnight shift, whether that means coming in a couple hours early, coming in at 5 a.m. So I have like a 2-hour overlap with the night folks, or coming in later in the evening for a couple of hours. I'm not typically spending my entire shift on the overnight, as I don't know that would be super sustainable for my sleep schedules, but coming in and being able to check in with those folks, I think our work looks very different on the day shift versus the night shift versus the swing shift. Our day folks, almost all of our program staff are here as well. But at night, it's just the front desk staff and a supervisor, and then that's it. Like, no one else is in the building. No other staff members are in the building. So I think it's super helpful for them to get to, put a face to a name, even if they know I exist and they know I'm here to provide support, for them to actually know me, be able to, feel comfortable approaching me, coming to me with needs they might have. But then also if they ever need anything, they don't have to do it outside of their normal work hours. You know, if they know that they're going to be seeing me because I'm going to come in, they can kind of handle those things then versus feeling like they have to come in outside of their shift just to be able to talk to me about something or to get something fixed or something like that.
I really love it because it's so aligned with and congruent with your worker voice and equity, you know, like it's great. I mean, I think most people would say they believe in that, but when you think about really operationalizing it, what does it look like? It's hard enough to do it with an organization that has one shift, but it's very hard to do it with an organization that has 3 shifts because, as you mentioned, you know, if you don't have relationships with these folks, it's hard to develop the trust that they'll actually tell you what's going on, much less tell you what they need in order to, you know, have a better working life. So the fact that you are willing to change your own schedule, I think is huge. And it shows that when we implement these ideas, we have to be thinking very creatively, right? I mean, it's one thing to send out a survey and ask people, what do you need? But it's another thing to get real answers in a timely fashion that speak to the heart of what your folks need. So I'm really impressed with what you and your organization have been doing, Caitlin. I think it's really tremendous. And obviously the organization, we all need it to succeed because organizations like yours are helping take care of our own citizens that have not been served by other systems. So we need you to succeed. And so the fact that you're finding ways to make it work is really inspiring to me. So do you have any other guidance or resources that you'd like to share with other organizations about workplace well-being?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd reiterate is that it is so relational and that, yeah, you will get more feedback and more honest feedback the more relationships you build with folks. And then also that it can, like I said earlier, it looks different in every org, but even beyond that, it might look different for every role. And so something I kind of have already touched on is that, you know, we've got our staff who work in their offices and we've got our staff who are our frontline workers. And so, you know, a lot of these things are going to look very different between the two of them, you know. And so I think it's important to not just take the word of a few employees and be like, okay, that is what we need to do for well-being, but to have, you know, if you're going to do a survey or you're going to try and get feedback, to have it from folks in every type of role so that you have a better picture of what that looks like. Because, you know, a well-being initiative that might benefit our direct care staff might not actually be that useful for our folks who mostly work at their desk, at their computer, and vice versa. And so I think it's important to recognize those differences and recognize that, you know, it's not one size fits all for everyone, even within your organization. And yeah, and you can learn so much more from that by having those conversations with folks in all different types of roles. And if you have multiple locations, we have 2 different locations. And so actually, and then we actually help staff a third. And so it looks incredibly different at those different 3, you know, safety might be very different at one of our buildings versus another based on the floor plan, based on how many exits we have, how we evacuate in a fire drill, you know. And so I think recognizing that the physical space and then also the job itself and the role will have a huge effect on what people need and want to feel supported at work is very important.
I love it. And I take it you travel sometimes to these other locations, yes, to physically show up, right? Which is its own challenge. And then I love it that you have a baked in mechanism that's not just the survey, but when you put it in the supervisor's conversations with people, then it's normal, it's normalized, right? It's not just a survey to fill out once a year or once a month. It's something that we talk about. And I can go to my supervisor for my formal check-in, right? If I feel comfortable enough is what we hope people will do, or approach you directly, right? So I love that you're normalizing the conversation through these daily operations. It's very strong. It's really wonderful. I hope things continue to, how do I want to say? I want to use homeostasis, but it feels like you guys have reached a new normal with different staffing levels, different kinds of roles, more supervisors. And I don't know if you're getting close to a place where you feel like there's balance, homeostasis here, but it sounds like you're moving in that direction. So
Yeah, I think we're definitely on the right path. And I think, I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that we're at a point where it's much more normalized to be working towards it and people understand more of what we're doing. And the fact that we can already see positive changes is huge in, promoting that, okay, we need to keep doing things like this and that there's more that can be done to improve this. I think it's huge. It's very exciting for me.
were there more positive changes you wanted to mention? Did I skip over some?
I don't know if there's any that I can think of right now that we didn't already kind of talk about. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have any specific ones to note right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. And I look forward, please do let me know how things are progressing with you. And I look forward to hearing more about your successes in your new role. So thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I'm very excited to be able to be a part of this and to get to watch everyone else's interviews in this series. I'm very stoked about it.
Thank you.